The following content is for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
911 location of your emergency.
Something is happening. Something's happening in our house. We don't know what.
Today we are here to prove to the world that you picked the wrong families. The wrong state, the wrong police officers, the wrong community.
Next tonight, chilling images of the Idaho College murders are now being made public following the sentencing of convicted killer Bryan Kohberger. Crime scene photos inside the house where 4 students were viciously stabbed to death. 2 handprints can be seen on one of the windows. A picture of the open sliding glass door Kohberger used to get into the house. He's now serving 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm Jared Mola. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Inside the Mind, and we have a lot to get into today because we are going through the newly released crime scene photos and video surveillance, as well as more unsealed documents and the Bryan Kohberger document dump. And boy, do we have some new eye-opening information that we're going to go through in this episode. You know, November 13th of this year will mark the 3-year anniversary of the absolutely cruel, barbaric murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xander Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were all stabbed to death in their off-campus home in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022 in Moscow, Idaho. Now, we are only weeks removed from Bryan Kohberger being sentenced and convicted for those senseless murders, which prompted his send-off to the Idaho Maximum Security Prison to begin his 4 consecutive life sentences. And he will be in there for the rest of his natural life. And as far as I'm concerned, the prison should bury the key. Now, are we hearing from Bryan Kohberger about what happened inside that King Road house that night? Are we getting any answers from him as to why he would senselessly murder 4 innocent people? Unfortunately, we are not getting those answers from him, but we are hearing from him. And before we get into this video surveillance and these documents, I want to give you an update on what his life has been like in that maximum security prison. So he is being housed in the prison's J block, which is a section of single occupancy cells that are typically reserved for high-risk prisoners who were only granted 1 hour of outdoor time per day. So he is in his single occupied cell for 23 hours per day. Keep that information close as we get into these reports. And these are being reported through the Daily Mail and their sources. Here we go. Bryan Kohberger has made allegations that other inmates inside the maximum security prison in Idaho have been relentlessly taunting and tormenting him by shouting through the HVAC vents throughout the day and the entirety of the night. They say that this tormenting is driving Bryan crazy. The inmates will get up to the grate and shout at him. The inmates have organized shifts among each other to carry out this relentless tormenting. It is being reported that Kohberger is extremely annoyed and frustrated and is complaining to authorities that he cannot sleep. So first of all, the sheer audacity to bring up not being able to sleep is absolutely appalling to me. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan were trying to sleep in their own home until you slaughtered them. The parents of these 4 innocent victims aren't getting much sleep either after you murdered their children. So suck it up. Where did he think he was going to end up? The Ritz? This is prison. Get over it. Suck it up. He made his bed by murdering 4 innocent people, and now he has to lay in it, shouting and all. So who cares? The prison doesn't care. Who cares? Get over it. Deal with it. You should have thought about that before you decided to murder 4 innocent people. So that's an update on how his stay is going. Sounds like it's far from smooth sailing. Good. So let's move over to the video surveillance, and I really want to get into this. I want to start with this because this is brand new footage with audio, which is crucial because the audio during the last clip that we are going to watch is very telling, and we will get to why in a second. Now, the entire video in this time frame is from 3:30 a.m. till about 4:20 a.m., which means we are going to see footage before and after the crime took place. Now, why is this surveillance video so crucial? Well, remember how we got here. This vehicle, which is a white Hyundai Elantra, became such a pivotal piece of evidence for investigators because of how often it was seen circling that neighborhood leading up to the murders. Now, to give you a visual on where this camera is located in relation to the crime scene, the camera was close by, facing away from the house, facing two side streets. So let's go to the first clip. The first clip shows Kohberger's white Elantra passing by at 3:30 a.m. Let's take a look. So obviously not that long of a video, but like I said, that was the first time that Elantra was caught on surveillance camera. After that, it was spotted 7 more times. It was spotted at 3:30 a.m., 3:38 a.m., 3:40 a.m., 3:56 a.m., and then one more time at 3:58 a.m. Where he went between 3:40 a.m. and 3:56 a.m., we have no idea. That's a 16-minute gap. Now at 4:04 a.m., we see the white Elantra approach the King Road house before attempting to park, but then at 4:06 a.m., it's spotted making a 3-point turn that was talked about in the reports at the time when they obtained that, and then circling back, proceeding to park. Let's take a look at that footage back to back of the 7 other sightings. This is at 3:33 a.m. Here we see Bryan exiting the neighborhood. This next one is at 3:38 a.m. and we see him entering the neighborhood. At 3:40 a.m. we see him exiting the neighborhood. At 3:56 a.m. is where we see him enter the neighborhood once again. It is unclear where he was in that 16-minute gap. Here at 3:58, he is seen exiting the neighborhood. This is 4:04 a.m. He is entering the neighborhood one more time. The timestamp here is at 4:06 a.m. He stops for a brief moment in the middle of the street, hangs around. Then proceeds to go forward, and this is where he makes the 3-point turn. So you can see in those clips how much he is stalking the neighborhood, circling the neighborhood time and time again. Clip after clip, he's just circling the neighborhood. And for those who are listening to the podcast and not watching, I encourage you to watch the YouTube version of this podcast so you can get a visual on these clips we are talking about, because it is very chilling watching them. You also have to think this is a Saturday night going into Sunday morning, college town. So I would imagine he is surveilling the property, making sure that there is not a ongoing party going on, making sure there's no one else around the house having a party. That's just something that pops into my mind as to why he's surveilling the property so many times. I mean, he stalked this house. We already know from the cell phone data that he was around the house multiple times leading up to the murder. So he was clearly stalking these victims, and it's so chilling to watch him circle the neighborhood like that, like a lion in the bushes before they attack the gazelle. It's just so creepy. It's so eerie, chilling. Ugh, So before we see Bryan come back into the neighborhood at 3:56 a.m., we actually see the DoorDash driver come into the neighborhood at 3:46 a.m. Now remember, Xana had ordered food on DoorDash, which would explain this DoorDash driver delivering the order to the King Road house that morning. So she comes into the neighborhood at 3:46 a.m. and on the video, she is seen what it looks like to be lost and confused as to where the house is that she's delivering to. A little ahead in the video, I assume she ends up finding the house and she ends up leaving the neighborhood at 3:53 a.m. Shortly after that, we see Bryan enter the neighborhood at 3:56 a.m. So this DoorDash driver just missed Bryan coming in to the neighborhood, and that has to be crazy for that DoorDash driver to know what he was planning on doing that morning, and she just missed him. Now, I don't think Bryan would attack her because I do believe he had a target in the home. It still is a little disturbing to think that she was right there at the house when he was planning to do this horrific murder. So now we are going to look at the final clip, and this is the most important clip, in my opinion, because this is the last time we see Kohberger and his white Elantra fleeing, absolutely peeling out of the crime scene. And I want you to pay attention to the audio because it is so damning, this audio. It is absolutely crucial that they were going to present this at trial. This was such a strong piece of evidence for the prosecution, which frustrates me because I'm like, had this gone to trial and had he not accepted a plea deal, man, this would have played so well for the prosecution. Let's take a look at this clip. Wow. Like I told you, absolutely peeled out of there. Peeled out of there. Absolutely gunned it. And what got me when I first watched this video is the sound of the tires screeching when he's making that turn. And if you watch the video closely, when he makes that turn, he almost loses control of the car, just ever so slightly. And he ends up gaining the control back. But my goodness, you have to think the adrenaline is at a absolute high during this moment because he's only on camera for 7 seconds. And in comparison to the other clips, let's take a look at this. So like we talked about before, he was seen on camera at 3:30 a.m., 3:33, 3:38, 3:40, 3:56, 3:58, 4:04, and 4:06. And then the final time when we saw him was 4:20 a.m. when he peeled out of there on that last clip. So the duration of each pass to me is interesting of those times he was spotted. So we have the first one at 11 seconds, second one at 12 seconds, third one 9 seconds, fourth one 12 seconds, fifth one 9 seconds, sixth one 12 seconds, and the final time that he was seen on camera right there peeling out was 7 seconds. Clearly much shorter than the rest of the clips. So, man, the adrenaline was at an all-time high there, clearly peeling out of there. And you have to think that he is in a frenzy peeling out of there because, like I said before, those tires screeching, it just tells me, like, it gives me a gauge on how high he was on his adrenaline. And knowing the information that we know, Dylan spotting him in the house, I believe he did not plan to kill 4 people. I personally believe he came in there to kill one person and was completely thrown off by Kaylee being in the room and there at all. You fast forward to the events taking place and Xana encountering him, ultimately stabbing her and stabbing Ethan. There was a lot, I think, that went off script for him. And after doing all of that, he had to get out of there. So the last thing I want to touch on regarding this surveillance footage is when he is pulling out of there on that last clip and he almost loses control making that turn. He's able to, what it seems like, regain that control. And it leads me to this discovery of he regains control of the car physically, but it also makes me think that he regains his composure mentally and almost is able to get back on track with his plan of continuing on his escape route. And we know that he took a very odd route back to Washington, and somewhere along that route, he disposed of the knife, the K-bar knife, and the clothes he was wearing. We still do not know where that murder weapon is or those clothes that he wore that night. And this goes back to my frustration with the prosecution. And I am aware that this is a mixed bag of opinions on this issue. I get that. But I am on the side of this guy should not have got a plea deal. Now, I hear the arguments of the other side on this. By not going to trial saves the family from seeing the horrific crime scene photos and reliving this horrific murder. I do get that. However, if you're going to give him a deal, which the prosecution did, why not add in the deal, hey, you were going to take us to where you buried the murder weapon and the clothes you wore that night. If you don't want to do that, no deal. I just don't understand why that was not stipulated in the plea deal at the very minimum. But unfortunately, that is irrelevant now because he is locked up for life, which is good. I just think that should have been in the plea deal. Along with the release of the surveillance video that we went through came the unsealing of many of the crime scene photos from 1122 King Road that were taken after the murders. And I will warn you, these are very difficult to look at, knowing what happened. And I am just going to talk through these. We are obviously not going to be showing any graphic content. And a lot of the things in these photos have been blurred and redacted. These photos were obtained by KTVB, which is an affiliate of NBC in Boise, and the photos include areas inside the home like the entryway, living room, bedrooms, and kitchen. There are also images of the infamous sliding glass door that Bryan Kohberger used to enter the home that morning. The images also show, and this photo was really disturbing, handprints on the back window of the home, but we do not know who those handprints belong to at this time. One photo that I do want to focus on for just a little bit here is a photo taken inside Kaylee's bedroom, and it is a picture of the floor with visible droplets of blood. Joseph Scott Morgan, he is a distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University, and he is a forensic death investigator. His knowledge and expertise on forensics is exceptional, and he went on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. And the way that he analyzed this photo and broke down what was happening is so eye-opening and gives us a snapshot. Let's take a look at his breakdown of this photo.
Nancy, when you look at Kaylee's room, there's a shot of the floor in there. And if you look very carefully, look straight down, see those droplets of blood right there? Do you know what that means? Those are passive blood droplets. He was standing there with the knife in his hand, not moving. For each one of those droplets that you see, that's a passive drop that comes off of the tip of that blade or off of his clothing and just drips. Think about how long he lingered there and just kind of observing what he had done, thinking about it. Where do I go next? What do I do? And yet I haven't seen, obviously, the horrific images of blood, but just that alone, coupled with the timestamp on that video that's rolling, you know the dynamic in this house. He's in control at that moment in time, and he has just butchered these precious kids one by one, and he's contemplating where to go next, what to do next.
That breakdown sent chills through my body. And it's a privilege to have experts like Joseph Scott Morgan break these photos down and give us a snapshot into what was happening in that moment. Because I'm looking at this photo and I'm analyzing it the best that I can. I see the blood droplets on the floor. I see the spacing of the blood droplets. But for Doc Morgan to dissect it like that and give us that snapshot into what was happening, talking about him standing there with the knife in his hand, not moving, and you can just picture the knife by his side, and those blood droplets are just coming off of the knife that he's holding as he's just standing there, thinking about what to do next. Bone chilling breakdown. I want to quickly go through some of the other released documents that reveal just how gruesome this crime scene was. And although this information gives us more insight into the details, it is certainly tough to read and hear. So do skip ahead if you need to. I do understand. And these documents are describing the autopsy results of these victims. Kaylee Gonzalez was stabbed 34 times and was described as unrecognizable as her facial structure was extremely damaged. A report said, of those 34 stab wounds, there was a good number of them that were defensive wounds. Kaylee also suffered a blunt force injury as well as asphyxiation injuries, and it is unclear what weapon was used to cause the blunt force injury. Xana Kernodle was involved in an intense struggle and had over 50 stab wounds. 50. The level of rage and overkill here is just jaw-dropping. It is important to know that a good number of the stab wounds that Xana obtained were defensive wounds, including wounds on her hands and face. So she fought. She certainly did not go down without a fight. According to the coroner's report, Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle, which severed his subclavian vein and subclavian artery, as well as severing his jugular vein. Kernodle's fatal injuries were stab wounds to her lung and heart. She had over 50 stab wounds, mostly defensive, according to a report. Both Madison and Kaylee were stabbed in the lung and liver. Gonzalez also had 2 brain bleeds and a stab behind her clavicle, which cut the vein and artery. The coroner determined that the murder weapon was not serrated. It was single-edged, very sharp, and said a lot of force was used by the suspect. She would later also determine that the shape and the size of the K-bar knife Kohberger purchased on Amazon was consistent as being the weapon which could have caused the injuries on all 4 of the victims. It is extremely difficult to read through these autopsy documents. There is such a substantial amount of rage and overkill when reading these autopsy results. 50 stab wounds on Xana. 50. 50 times he stabbed her. Most of those defensive wounds. Kaylee, over 34 stab wounds. In the reports, they're describing her facial structure as unrecognizable and extremely damaged. Madison, sharp force injuries, stabbed in the lung and the liver. We obviously know that Bryan Kohberger is an absolute monster. We do not have to even go into that. We all know that. And trying to answer why he would do something like this, the answer to that question would not make sense to normal people. This guy is an absolute monster. Before the releasing of these documents, I did not think the level of violence would be this apparent. Absolutely heartbreaking hearing those details of how those 4 innocent college students died. And we should never use the word closure for the parents of these victims. There is no closure. You should never have to bury your child, and those families are forever broken. I do hope the parents can get some satisfaction knowing that he is being relentlessly tormented in his prison cell. The last thing I want to dive into on this episode is what we are learning about his cell phone. We do have some new information from Cellbrite. Cellbrite is a company specializing in digital intelligence solutions. They are basically digital forensic investigators. They dig through cell phone data. And to no surprise, what they are reporting about what they found on Bryan's cell phone is extremely disturbing. So these reports are coming from The Independent, and they conducted an interview with Heather Barnhart. She is a forensic analyst at Cellbrite, and these are some of the statements she made from her findings on Bryan's phone. What she's referencing here is files on serial killers. Let's read. He didn't just Google these cases, Heather said. He downloaded full PDFs of case files, not once but repeatedly. Here's the next one, quote, he was downloading detailed reports on serial killers, including Danny Rolling, who also murdered college students using a similar knife, This wasn't casual browsing. This was meticulous research, she added, end quote. Continuing on, quote, Kohberger failed to do a full cleanup of his phone. Details of what the team found, including scrubbed files, private browsing, VPN activity, and obsessive downloads about other serial killers, were found hidden deep in his phone, end quote. And then here's the last one, quote, these were not found in a visible gallery or standard folder, but in buried file directories that required forensic tools to uncover. He had also downloaded reports on the Idaho murders and extensive searches of his victims. So certainly some disturbing findings that Sellbright discovered. And one of the key takeaways from those findings is the obsessive downloading of the serial killer documents. Obsessive meaning he's downloading them, revisiting them, putting them in specific folders. Now, one might say, oh, well, he's a PhD student studying criminology. But they mentioned in there, this was beyond studying. This was obsessive, particularly studying Danny Rolling, who was the Gainesville Ripper, who also used a similar knife, a K-bar style knife. Now, some might argue that that is circumstantial evidence against him because he was studying criminology as a PhD student. But I always go back to that point that Sellbright made of obsessive downloading. Certainly disturbing to see those key details in those reports. I want to take a look at one last clip, and this clip is an interview of Jared and Heather Barnhart going on Banfield of NewsNation, and they're talking about specific findings of what Kohberger was physically doing with his phone on the night of the murders. Also, they are going to be explaining the mysterious connection to the Mad Greek Wi-Fi connection. Now, for those who don't know, the Mad Greek restaurant was a restaurant in downtown Moscow that Xana and Maddie actually worked at. So when we're talking about connection to the victim, did the killer have a connection to the victims? Well, considering that Maddie and Xana worked at this restaurant and his phone connected to the Wi-Fi of that restaurant, leads to speculation that there might have been a connection made at some point. So let's take a look at this clip.
And I know that we learned during the final hearings before he was sent packing to the Idaho Maximum Security Institution that he had done quite a job at scrubbing a lot of his devices. How good a job, and how were you able to get past some of what he thought he put over on you?
This was one of the hardest investigations I've ever worked in 23 years of looking at digital data. He cleaned up well. He knew how to use VPNs. He knew how to use incognito browsing. Where he messed up, downloads on his Android device. He also didn't consider the fact that even on a PC, if you delete, every contact leaves a trace. So we can see the files when you turn something off. We can see when you clear something. All of that was left behind for us.
Let me ask you this. The handshakes that we now find are so helpful in digital forensics when killers don't realize they're connecting to a Wi-Fi where they're not supposed to be. Did he have a lot of questionable digital handshakes, like say at the Mad Greek restaurant where two of the victims worked? Did you see anything that was of interest or evidentially helpful with his digital handshakes?
Yeah, I'll break that down sort of with two parts. So his Wi-Fi connections, there were just a few. And the interesting part about this is 2 days prior to the murders, he turned off Wi-Fi for his phone. So he just didn't want his device to be able to connect to Wi-Fi. It turned back on soon after the murders. But there was one reference to Mad Greek, and it came from a passive assist file associated with Google Maps. So if you open Google Maps and you search for restaurants near me, if you're near Mad Greek, it would populate, and that reference was then logged on his phone.
And then the other question I have for you is, we just looked at that selfie. We had it up on the screen that he took within hours of the murders. He's freshly washed and he's got the thumbs up. He looks like he's in a bathroom and he looks extremely proud. Were you able to ascertain anything about that photo? Did he manipulate the photo? Did he screen grab it bigger? Did he rest on it for, hours or minutes? Did he send it to anyone? Did you see anything of interest about that picture?
So this photo jumped out to us right away. And I remember us asking the FBI at the time, have you seen this? And they said, yes, we found that already. We're like, okay, but look at his knuckles and how white they are. To us, it looks like someone that scrubbed them and had to get something off, maybe blood or some kind of residue off his knuckles. Also, the Band-Aid on his finger was there. In that image, you can see a shower curtain. In later images that he had taken, the shower curtain from his apartment was gone. So just small details like that. But he didn't have friends to send this to. And I don't think it's a photo that he would have shared with mother or father. We didn't see any manipulations or access to printing. So it's almost as if he did this and several other selfies of similar nature, but with fewer clothing for himself.
Yeah, it was normal for him to take selfies and do nothing with them. They weren't sent to a person.
So sorry to interrupt, but let me be clear. We've only seen this selfie on the morning of the murders. Did you find other selfies that he took of himself, either in the bathroom or elsewhere the morning of the murders or that day?
No, not the morning of the murders. Just in general, his selfies that he would often take like flexing his muscles and shirtless. But again, we have no idea what he did with them. It was just a photo that was taken, and there's no evidence that he was sending them to anyone. It's just kind of for himself.
Well, the bandages that you noticed on his left, I think that's his left hand, unless the photo's reversed. But someone in the class also said in police documents today that they noticed he came to class shortly after the murders. And of course, they don't know about the murders. They're just looking back in hindsight to October, late October. And they said he came in with his two middle fingers bandaged and said, oh, he had just had some accident inside his home. One last aha moment that the two of you had, Heather and Jared. He said that his alibi was that he was going to be out stargazing that night, out in the middle of the night, stargazing. But you found something about the phone that would have absolutely obliterated the alibi. Can you explain that?
Sure. Yeah, it seems silly to even write it. But on the night of the murders, he physically pressed the side button and turned his phone off. And that might not seem too significant, but it really is, because it proves that this human was awake at 2 whatever in the morning and turning his phone off and then later powering it back on. And the crazy part was writing in a report that a phone can't take photos while it's powered off, but just to prove that his alibi was ridiculous. But he turned his phone off, and then these people were murdered, and then he turned it back on. That's what happened.
Well, and also, he turned the phone off at 100%, so he could never say the phone just died. Phone was fully batteried up. Heather and Jared Barnhart, I cannot thank you enough for this interview. I could talk to you for hours and hours. I'm going to have you back as well. Thank you for helping us sort of sort through a lot of this. Really appreciate it.
Definitely some interesting takeaways from that analysis. Clearly, it seems that he thought he did everything correct in terms of wiping his devices. What's so interesting here in their findings is that they can find when he wiped something or deleted something because everything has a trace. Him thinking he was so smart to clear his devices to where he wouldn't leave an evidence trail just didn't turn out to be totally true. What struck me about the cell phone data too is him meticulously turning off his Wi-Fi 2 days before the murder. He didn't want to be picked up. And another interesting thing they talk about is him physically turning off his phone, like physically pressing the power button. Them being able to obtain that information is insane to me. When we're putting all this information together and putting the pieces together here, we can see he meticulously planned this attack step by step, turning off the phone to not be discovered, then turning it back on after the murders. And I'll close with this. All of this information gives us some more insight into the details of what happened, but we still do not know why he did it. There are theories out there, and the scary part is there might not be a reason. And I don't know if we ever will hear from Bryan Kohberger, but even if we do hear from him, how will we know that what he says is the truth? There are certainly going to be more documents that are unsealed and released, and we will go through those documents when they do become available. But that'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mind. Thank you for joining me today. Please let me know in the comments what your take on all of this new information is, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Until next time.